And if she can best one of the chosen in Tel Aranriod, what chance do we have? Rounding on the others, she attempted a scolding tone. Did you two know about this? She had managed to sound peevish. Chesmal met Eldrith's stare indignantly, while Asni gave her surprised innocence. They had known, but who was going to stand in Tamila's way? She doubted very much that Eldrith would have made more than a token protest had she been there. Tamila knew exactly her effect on them. She should have hung her head at Eldrith's lecture, faint-hearted as it was, and apologized for going against her wishes. Instead, she smiled. That smile never reached her eyes, though, large and dark and much too bright. You were right, Eldrith. Right that Elaine would come here, and right that Nynaeve would come with her, it seems. They were together, and it is clear they are both in the palace. Yes, Eldrith said, squirming slightly under Tamila's gaze. Well, and she licked her lips and shifted her feet, too. Even so, until we can see how to get at them past all those Wilders. They are Wilders, Eldrith. Tamila threw herself down in a chair, limbs sprawling carelessly, and her tone hardened. Not enough to seem commanding, but still more than merely firm. There are only 3 sisters to trouble us, and we can dispose of them. We can take Nynaeve and perhaps Elaine in the bargain. Abruptly, she leaned forward, hands on the arms of the chair. Disarrayed clothing or not, there was no shred of indolence about her now. Eldrith stepped back as though pushed by Tamila's eyes. Else why are we here, Eldrith? It is what we came for. No one had anything to say to that. Behind them lay a string of failures, in Tyr, in Tanchico, that might well cost them their lives when the Supreme Council laid hands on them, but not if they had one of the chosen for a patron, and if Mogadin had wanted Nynaeve so badly, perhaps another of them would too. The real difficulty would be finding one of the chosen to present with their gift. No one but Asni seemed to have considered that part of it. There were others there, Tamila went on, leaning back once more. She sounded almost bored. Spying on our 2 accepted, a man who let them see him, and someone else I could not see. She pouted irritably. At least it would have been a pout, except for her eyes. I had to stay behind a column so the girls would not see me. That should please you, Eldrith, that they did not see me. Are you pleased? Eldrith almost stammered, getting out how pleased she was. Asni let herself feel her 4 warders coming ever closer. She had stopped masking herself when they left Samara. Only Powell was a friend of the dark, of course, yet the others would do whatever she said, believe whatever she told them. It would be necessary to keep them concealed from the others unless absolutely necessary, but she wanted armed men close at hand. Muscles and steel were very useful. And if worst came to worst, she could always reveal the long fluted rod that Mogadin had not hidden so well as she thought she had. The early morning light in the sitting room's windows was gray, an earlier hour than the Lady Cheyenne usually rose, but this morning she had been dressed while it was still full dark. The Lady Cheyenne was how she thought of herself now. Millie Skene, the saddler's daughter, was almost completely forgotten. In every way that mattered, she really was the Lady Cheyenne Avarhin, and had been for years. Lord Willem Avarhin had been impoverished, reduced to living in a ramshackle farmhouse and unable to keep even that in good repair. He and his only daughter, the last of a declining line, had stayed in the country, far from anywhere their penury might be exposed, and now they were only bones buried in the forest near that farmhouse, and she was the Lady Cheyenne, and if this tall, well-appointed stone house was not a manor, it still had been the property of a well-to-do merchant. She was long dead, too, after signing over her gold to her heir. The furnishings were well made, the carpets costly, the tapestries and even the seat cushions embroidered with thread of gold, and the fire roared in a wide, blue-veined marble fireplace. She had had the once plain lintel carved with Avarhin's heart and hand, row on row. "More wine, girl," she said curtly, and Phalion scurried with the tall-necked silver pitcher to refill her goblet with steaming spiced wine. The livery of a maid, with the red heart and golden hand on her breast, suited Phalion. Her long face was a stiff mask as she hurried to replace the picture on the drawered high chest and take up her place beside the door. "You play a dangerous game," Marilyn Gamalfin said, rolling her own goblet between her palms. A skinny woman with lifeless pale brown hair, the Brown sister did not look an Aes Sedai. Her narrow face and wide nose would have fitted better above Phalian's livery than it did above her fine blue wool, and that was suitable only for a middling merchant. "She is shielded somehow, but when she can channel again, she will make you howl for this." Her thin lips quirked in a humorless smile. "You may find yourself wishing you could howl." "Moradin chose this for her," Cheyenne replied. "She failed in Ebu Dar, and he ordered her punished. I don't know the details and don't want to, but if Moradin wants her nose ground in the mud, I'll push it so deep she is breathing mud a year from now. Or do you suggest I disobey one of the chosen?" She barely suppressed a shudder at the very thought. Marilyn tried to hide her expression in drinking, but her eyes tightened. "What about you, Phalian?" Cheyenne asked. "Would you like me to ask Moradin to take you away? He might find you something less onerous. Mules might sing like nightingales, too." Phalian did not even hesitate. She bobbed a maid's straight-backed curtsy, her face going even paler than it already was. "No, mistress," she said hastily. "I am content with my situation, mistress." "You see," Cheyenne said to the other Aes Sedai. She doubted very much that Phalian was anything approaching content, but the woman would accept whatever was handed out rather than face Moradin's displeasure directly. For the same reason, Cheyenne would rule her with a very heavy hand. You never knew what one of the chosen might learn of and take amiss. She herself thought her own failure was buried deep, but she would take no chances. "When she can channel again, she won't have to be a maid all the time, Marilyn." Anyway, Moradin had said Cheyenne could kill her if she wished. There was always that, if her position began to chafe too much. He had said she could kill both sisters, if she wished. "That's as may be," Marilyn said darkly. She cast a sidelong glance at Phalian and grimaced. "Now, Moghedin instructed me to offer you what assistance I thought I could give, but I'll tell you right now I won't enter the royal palace. The whole city has too many sisters in it for my taste, but the palace is stuffed with wilders on top. I wouldn't get 10 feet without someone knowing I was there." Sighing, Cheyenne leaned back and crossed her legs, idly kicking a slippered foot. Why did people always think you did not know as much as they? The world was full of fools. "Moghedin ordered you to obey me, Marilyn. I know, because Moradin told me. He did not say so right out, but I think when he snaps his fingers, Moghedin jumps." Talking about the chosen this way was dangerous, but she had to make matters clear. "Do you want to tell me again what you won't do?" The narrow-faced Aes Sedai licked her lips, darting another glance at Phalian. Did the woman fear she would end up that way? Truth to tell, Cheyenne would have traded Phalian for a proper lady's maid in a heartbeat. Well, as long as she could retain her other services. Very likely they both would have to die when this was finished. Cheyenne did not like leaving loose ends. "I wasn't lying about that," Marilyn said slowly. "I really wouldn't get 10 feet. But there's a woman already in the palace. She can do what you need. It may take time to make contact, though. Just make sure it's not too long a time, Marilyn." So, one of the sisters in the palace was Black Aja, was she? She would have to be Aes Sedai, not just a dark friend, to do what Cheyenne needed. The door opened, and Marilyn looked in questioningly, his heavily muscled bulk almost filling the doorway. Beyond him, she could make out another man. At her nod, Marilyn stepped aside and motioned David Hanlon to enter, closing the door behind him. Hanlon was swathed in a dark cloak, but he snaked out one hand to cup Phalian's bottom through her dress. She glared at him bitterly, but did not move away. Hanlon was part of her punishment. Still, Cheyenne had no wish to watch him fondle the woman. "Do that later," she ordered. "Did it go well?" A broad smile split his axe-like face. "It went exactly as I planned it, of course." He threw one side of the dark cloak over his shoulder, revealing golden knots of rank on his red coat. "You are speaking to the captain of the Queen's bodyguard."
Chapter 11. Ideas of Importance. Without even taking a look, Rand stepped through the gateway into a large, dark room. The strain of holding the weave, of fighting Sayadin, made him sway. He wanted to gag, to double over and spew up everything in him. Holding himself upright was an effort. A little light crept through cracks between the shutters of a few small windows set high in one wall, just enough to see by with the power in him. Furniture and large cloth-covered shapes nearly filled the room, interspersed with wide barrels of the sort used to store crockery, chests of all shapes and sizes, boxes and crates and knickknacks. Little more than walkways a pace or two wide remained clear. He had been sure he would not find servants hunting for something or cleaning up. The highest floor of the royal palace had several such storerooms, looking like the attics of huge farmhouses, and just about forgotten. Besides, he was Taviran, after all. A good thing no one had been there when the gateway opened. One edge of it had sliced the corner off an empty chest bound in cracked, rotting leather. The other had taken a glass-smooth shaving down the length of a long inlaid table, stacked with vases and wooden boxes. Maybe some Queen of Andor had eaten at that table, a century or two gone. A century or two, Lews Therin laughed thickly in his head. A very long time. For the love of the light, let go. This is the pit of doom. The voice dwindled as the man fled into the recesses of Rand's mind. For once, he had his own reasons to listen to Lews Therin's complaints. Hastily, he motioned Min to follow him from the forest clearing on the other side of the gateway, and as soon as she did, he let it close behind her in a quick vertical slash of light by releasing Sayadin. Blessedly, the nausea went with it. His head still spun a little, but he did not feel as if he were going to vomit or fall over or both. The feel of filth remained, though, the Dark One's taint oozing into him from the weaves he had tied off around himself. Shifting the strap of his leather scrip from one shoulder to the other, he tried to use the motion to hide wiping sweat from his face with his sleeve. He did not have to worry about Min noticing, after all, however. Her blue-heeled boots stirred the dust on the floor at her first step, and her second made it rise. She pulled a laced-edge handkerchief from her coat sleeve just in time to catch a violent sneeze, followed by a second and third, each worse than the last. He wished she had been willing to stay in a dress. Embroidered white flowers decorated the sleeves and lapels of her blue coat, and paler blue breeches molded her legs snugly. With yellow embroidered bright blue riding gloves tucked behind her belt, and a cloak edged with yellow scroll work and held by a golden pin in the shape of a rose, she did look as if she had arrived by more normal means, but she would draw every eye. He was in coarse brown woolens any laborer might wear. Most places in the last few days he had been blatant with his presence. This time, he did not want just to be gone before anyone knew he had been here. He did not want anyone but a special few to ever know he had been. "Why are you grinning at me and thumbing your ear like a looby?" she demanded, stuffing the handkerchief back into her sleeve. Suspicion filled her big dark eyes. "I was just thinking how beautiful you are," he said quietly. She was. He could look at her without thinking so, or without regretting that he was too weak to send her away to safety. She drew a deep breath and sneezed before she could even clap a hand over her mouth, then glared at him as if it were somehow his fault. "I abandoned my horse for you, Rand al'Thor. I curled my hair for you. I gave up my life for you. I will not give up my coat and breeches. Besides, no one here has ever seen me in a dress for more time than it took me to change out of it. You know this won't work unless I'm recognized. You certainly can't pretend you wandered in off the street with that face." Unthinking, he ran a hand across his jaw, feeling his own face, but that was not what Min saw. Anyone looking at him would see a man inches shorter and years older than Rand al'Thor, with lank black hair, dull brown eyes, and a wart on his bulbous nose. Only someone who touched him could pierce the mask of mirrors. Even an Ashaman would not see it, with the weaves inverted. though if there were Asherman in the palace, it might mean his plans had gone further awry than he believed. This visit could not, must not, come to killing. In any case, she was right. It was not a face that would have been allowed into the royal palace of Andor unescorted. As long as we can finish this and be gone quickly, he said, before anyone has time to think that if you're here, maybe I am too. Rand, she said, her voice soft, and he eyed her warily. Resting a hand on his chest, she looked up at him with a serious expression. Rand, you really need to see Elaine. And Avienda, I suppose. You know she's probably here too. If you... He shook his head and wished he had not. The dizziness had still not gone completely. No, he said curtly. Light. No matter what Min said, he just could not believe that Elaine and Avienda both loved him. Or that the fact they did, if it was a fact, did not upset her. Women were not that strange. Elaine and Avienda had reason to hate him, not love him, and Elaine, at least, had made herself clear. Worse, he was in love with both of them as well as with Min. He had to be as hard as steel, but he thought he might shatter if he had to face all three at once. We find Nynaeve and Matt and go as fast as we can. She opened her mouth, but he gave her no chance to speak. Don't argue with me, Min. There is no time for it. Tilting her head to one side, Min put on a small, amused smile. When do I ever argue with you? Don't I always do exactly as you tell me? If that lie were not bad enough, she added, I was going to say, if you want to hurry, why are we standing in this dusty storeroom all day? For punctuation, she sneezed again. She was the least likely to cause comment, even dressed as she was, so she put her head out of the room first. Apparently, the storeroom was not entirely forgotten. The heavy door's hinges barely creaked. A quick look both ways, and she hurried out, gesturing him to follow. To Viren or no, he was relieved to find the long corridor empty. The most timid servant might have wondered at seeing them emerge from a storeroom in the upper reaches of the palace. Still, they would encounter people soon enough. The royal palace did not run as heavily to servants as the Sun Palace or the Stone of Tyr, but there were still hundreds of them in a place this size. Walking along beside Min, he tried to shamble and gawk at bright tapestries and carved wall panels and polished high chests. None were so fine this high as they would be lower down, but a common workman would gawk. We need to get down to a lower floor as fast as we can, he murmured. There was still no one in sight, but there might be 10 people around the next corner. Remember, just ask the first servant we see where to find Nynaeve and Matt. Don't elaborate unless you have to. Why, thank you for reminding me, Rand. I knew something had slipped my mind, and I just couldn't imagine what. Her brief smile was much too tight, and she muttered something under her breath. Rand sighed. This was too important for her to play games, but she was going to if he'd let her. Not that she saw it that way. Sometimes, though, her ideas of important differed widely from his. Very widely. He would have to keep a close eye on her. Why, Mistress Farshaw, a woman's voice said behind them. It is Mistress Farshaw, isn't it? The script swung and thumped Rand's back heavily as he spun around. The plump graying woman staring at Min in astonishment was perhaps the last person he wanted to meet, besides Elaine or Avienda. Wondering why she was wearing a red tabard with the white lion large in the front, he slouched and avoided looking at her directly. Just a workman doing his job. No reason to glance at him twice. Mistress Harfor? Min exclaimed, beaming delightedly. Yes, it's me. And you are just the woman I was looking for. I'm afraid I'm lost. Can you tell me where to find Nynaeve Almira? And Matt Cawthon? This fellow has something Nynaeve asked him to deliver. The first mate frowned slightly at Rand before returning her attention to Min. She raised an eyebrow at Min's garments, or maybe at the dust on them, but she mentioned neither. Matt Cawthon? I don't believe I know him. Unless he's one of the new servants or guardsmen, she added doubtfully. As for Nynaeve Sedai, she's very busy. I suppose it will be all right with her if I accept whatever it is and put it in her room. Rand jerked upright. Nynaeve Sedai? Why would the others, the real Aes Sedai, let her play at that still? And Matt was not here? Had never been here, apparently. Colors whirled in his head, almost an image he could make out. In a heartbeat it vanished, but he staggered. Mistress Harfor frowned at him again and sniffed. Likely she thought him drunk. Min frowned too, but in thought, tapping a finger on her chin, and that only lasted a moment. I think Nynaeve Sedai wants to see him. The hesitation was barely noticeable. Could you have him shown to her rooms, Mistress Harfor? I have another errand before I go. You mind your manners now, Newly, and do as you're told. There's a good fellow. Rand opened his mouth, but before he could get out a word, she darted away down the corridor, almost running. Her cloak flared behind her. She was moving so quickly. Burn her, she was going to try finding Elaine. She could ruin everything. Your plans fail because you want to live, madman. Luce Theron's voice was a rough, sweaty whisper. Accept that you are dead. Accept it, and stop tormenting me, madman. Rand suppressed the voice to a muted buzz, a bite-me buzzing in the darkness of his head. Newly? What kind of name was Newly? Mistress Harfor gaped after Min until she vanished around a corner, then gave her tabard an adjusting tug it did not need. She turned her disapproval on Rand. Even with the mask of mirrors, she saw a man who towered over her, but Rena Harfor was not a woman to let a small thing like that put her off stride for an instant. I mistrust the looks of you, Newly, she said, her eyebrows drawn down sharply. So watch your step. You'll watch it very carefully, if you have any brain at all. Holding the script's shoulder strap with one hand, he tugged his forelock with the other. Yes, mistress, he muttered gruffly. The first mate might recognize his real voice. Min had been supposed to do all the talking until they found Nynaeve and Matt. What in the life was he going to do if she did bring Elaine? And maybe Avienda. She was probably here too. Light! Pardon, mistress, but we ought to hurry. It's urgent I see Nynaeve as soon as possible. He hefted the script slightly. She wanted this real important like. If he was done when Min returned, he might be able to get away with her before he had to face the other two. If Nynaeve Sedai thought it was urgent, the plump woman told him tartly, placing heavy emphasis on the honorific he had omitted, she would have left word you were expected. Now follow me and keep your comments and opinions to yourself. She started off without waiting for a reply, without looking back, gliding along with a stately grace. After all, what could he do except as he had been told? As he recalled, the first maid was accustomed to everyone doing as they were told. Striding to catch up, he took only one step at her side before her startled look made him drop back, tugging his forelock and mumbling apologies. He was not used to having to walk behind anyone. It was not calculated to moderate his mood. The tag end of dizziness hung on, too, and the filth of the taint. He seemed to be in a foul mood more often than not of late, unless Min was with him. Before they had gone very far, liveried servants began to appear in the hallway, polishing and dusting and carrying, scurrying every which way. Plainly, the absence of people when he and Min left the storeroom was a rare occurrence. To Viren again. Down a flight of narrow service stairs built into the wall, and there were even more. And something else. A great many women who were not in livery. Copper-skinned Domani women, short, pale Kyrianan, women with olive skins and dark eyes, who were certainly not Andoran. They made him smile, a tight, satisfied smile. None had what he could call an ageless face, and a number even bore lines and wrinkles that never decorated any Aes Sedai's face. But sometimes goosebumps danced on his skin when he came near one of them. They were channeling, or at least holding Sayadar. Mistress Harfor led him past closed doors where that prickling raced too. Behind those doors, still other women had to be channeling. Pardon, mistress, he said in the coarse voice he had adopted for Newly. How many Aes Sedai are there in the palace? That is no concern of yours, she snapped. Glancing over one shoulder at him, though, she sighed and relented. I don't suppose there is any harm in you knowing. 5, counting the Lady Elaine and Nynaeve Sedai. A touch of pride entered her voice. It has been a long time since that many Aes Sedai claimed guest right here at one time. Rand could have laughed, though without amusement. 5? No, that included Nynaeve and Elaine. 3 real Aes Sedai. 3. Whoever the rest were did not really matter. He had begun to believe that the rumors of hundreds of Aes Sedai moving toward Camelin with an army meant there really might be that many ready to follow the Dragon Reborn. Instead, even his original hope for a double handful of them had been wildly optimistic. The rumors were only rumors. Or else some scheme of Elida's making. Light. Where was Matt? Color flashed in his head. For an instant, he thought it was Matt's face, and he stumbled. If you came here drunk, Newly, Mistress Harfor said firmly, you will leave regretting it bitterly. I will see to it myself. Yes, Mistress, Rand muttered, jerking at his forelock. Inside his head, Luce Theron cackled in mad, weeping laughter. It had to come here. It was necessary. But he was already beginning to regret it.
Surrounded by the light of Saidar, Nynaeve and Talaan faced one another at 4 paces in front of the fireplace, where a brisk blaze had managed to take all chill out of the air. Or maybe it was effort that had warmed her, Nynaeve thought sourly. This lesson had lasted an hour already by the ornate clock on the carved mantel. An hour of channeling without rest would warm anyone. Saritha was supposed to be here, not her, but the Brown had slipped out of the palace, leaving a note about an urgent errand in the city. Cariana had refused to take 2 days in a row, and Van Deen still refused to take any, on the ridiculous grounds that teaching Kirstian and Zarya left her no time. Like this, she said, whipping her flow of spirit around the boy's slim seafolk apprentice's attempt at fending her off. Adding the force of her own flow, she pushed the girls further away, and at the same time channeled air in 3 separate weaves. One tickled Talaan's ribs through her blue linen blouse. A simple ploy, but the girl gasped in surprise, and for an instant her embrace of the source lessened just a hair, the faintest flicker in the power filling her. In that heartbeat, Nynaeve stopped the pushing she had just begun on the other's flow and snapped her own back to its original target. Forcing the shield onto Talaan still felt much like slapping a wall, except the sting was spread evenly across her skin rather than just in her palm. Hardly an improvement, but the glow of Saidar vanished just as the last 2 flows of air trapped Talaan's arms at her sides and pulled her knees together in their wide, dark trousers. Very neatly done, if Nynaeve did think so herself. The girl was very agile, very deft with her weaves. Besides, trying to shield someone who held the power was chancy at best and futile at worst, unless you were very much stronger than they. Sometimes, if you were. And Talaan matched her as closely as made no difference. That helped keep a satisfied smile from her face. It seemed a very short time ago that sisters had been startled at her strength and believed that only some of the Forsaken possessed greater. Talaan had not slowed yet. She was little more than a child. 15? Maybe younger. The light alone knew what her potential was. At least none of the Windfinders had mentioned it, and Nynaeve was not about to ask. She had no interest in knowing how much stronger than she, a seafolk girl, was going to be. None at all. Bare feet shuffling on the patterned green carpet, Talaan made one futile attempt to break the shield that Nynaeve held easily, then sighed in defeat and lowered her eyes. Even when she had succeeded in following Nynaeve's instruction, she behaved as if she had failed, and now she slumped so dejectedly you might have thought the weaves of air were all that held her upright. Letting her flows dissipate, Nynaeve adjusted her shawl and opened her mouth to tell Talaan what she had done wrong, and to point out, once again, that it was useless to try breaking free unless you were much stronger than whoever had shielded you. The sea folk hardly seemed to believe anything she told them, until she told them 10 times and showed them 20. "She used your own force against you," Senina Din Ryle said bluntly before Nynaeve could speak. "And distraction, again. It is like wrestling, girl. You know how to wrestle." "Try again," Zaida commanded with a brisk gesture of one dark, tattooed hand. All of the chairs in the room had been moved against the wall, though there was no real need for a clear space, and Zaida sat watching the lesson flanked by 6 windfinders, a riot of reds and yellows and blues, in brocaded silks and brightly dyed linens, a flinch-inducing display of earrings and nose rings and medallion-laden chains. That was always the way. One of the 2 apprentices was used for the actual lesson, or Marililla, Nynaeve had heard, actually forced to take the part of an apprentice unless she herself was teaching, while Zaida and one group or another of windfinders watched. The Wave Mistress could not channel, of course, though she was always present, and none of the windfinders would actually stoop to participating personally. Oh, never that. In Nynaeve's estimation, today's grouping was very odd, considering the sea folk's obsession with rank. Zaida's own windfinder, Shialin, sat on her right, a slender, coolly reserved woman almost as tall as Avienda and towering over Zaida. That was proper as far as Nynaeve understood, but at Zaida's left was Senina, and she served on a Sorer, one of the sea folk's smaller vessels, and hers among the smallest of those. Of course, the weathered woman with her creased face and hair thick with gray had worn more than her present 6 earrings in the past, and more golden medallions on the chain across her dark left cheek. She had been windfinder to the mistress of the ships before Nesta Dinrius was elected to the post, but by their law, when the mistress of the ships or a wave mistress died, her windfinder had to begin again at the lowest level. There was more to it than respect for Senina's former position, though, Nynaeve was certain. Rhaenyn, an apple-cheeked young woman who also served on a Sorer, occupied the chair next to Senina, and stone-faced, flat-eyed Kurin sat beside Shialin like a black carving. This relegated Kyra and Tabrela to the outermost chairs, and they were both windfinders to wave mistresses themselves, with 4 fat earrings in each ear, and nearly as many medallions as Zaida herself. Perhaps it was just to keep the haughty-eyed sisters apart, though. They hated one another with a passion only blood kin could achieve. Perhaps that was it. Understanding the Atha'an Mier was worse than trying to understand men. A woman could go mad trying. Muttering to herself, Nynaeve gave her shawl a jerk and prepared herself, readying her flows. The pure joy of holding Saidar could hardly compete with her vexation. "Try again, Nynaeve. One more time, Nynaeve. Do it now, Nynaeve." At least Renila was not there. Often they wanted her to teach things she did not know as well as others. Too often, things she barely knew at all, she admitted reluctantly. She had not really had much training in the tower, and whenever she fumbled in the slightest, Renila positively delighted in making her sweat. The others made her sweat, too, but they did not seem to take so much pleasure in it. Anyway, after a solid hour, she was tired. Drat Saritha and her errand. She struck out again, but this time Tala'an's flow of spirit met hers much more lightly than she expected, and her own flow swept the other further aside than she had meant. Abruptly, 6 weaves of air shot out from the girl, darting toward Nynaeve, and Nynaeve quickly sliced them with fire. The severed flows snapped back into Tala'an, jolting her visibly, but before they had vanished properly, 6 more appeared, faster than before. Nynaeve slashed, and gaped as Tala'an's weave of spirit flickered around hers and wrapped around her, cutting off Saidar. She was shielded. Tala'an had shielded her. For the final indignity, flows of air pinioned her arms and legs tightly, crushing her skirts. If she had not been so upset at Saritha, it never would have happened. "The girl has her," Kyra said, sounding surprised. No one would think she was Tala'an's mother by the cold look she gave her. Indeed, Tala'an seemed embarrassed by her own success, releasing the flows immediately and dropping her eyes to the floor. "Very good, Tala'an," Nynaeve said, since no one else was offering a word of praise or encouragement. Irritably, she shook out her shawl behind her and settled it into the crooks of her elbows. No need to tell the girl she had been lucky. She was quick, true, but Nynaeve was not sure she herself could keep channeling much longer. She certainly was not at her best now. I'm afraid that is all the time I have today, so try again, Zyda commanded, leaning forward intently. I want to see something. That was not an explanation or anything near apology, simply a statement of fact. Zyda never explained or apologized. She just expected obedience. Nynaeve considered telling the woman she could not see anything they were doing anyway, but she rejected the thought immediately. Not with 6 windfinders in the room. 2 days earlier she had voiced her opinions freely, and she certainly did not want a repeat of that. She had tried thinking of it as a penance for speaking without thinking, but that did not help very much. She wished she had never taught them to link. One more time, she said tightly, turning back to Talaan, and then I must go. She was ready for the girl's trick this time. Channeling, she met Talaan's weave more dexterously and without so much force. The girl smiled at her uncertainly, thinking Nynaeve would not be distracted by extraneous flows of air this time, was she? Talaan's weave began to curl around hers, and she nimbly spun her own to catch it. She would be ready when the woman produced her flows of air. Or maybe not air this time. Nothing dangerous, surely. This was practice. Only Talaan's flow of spirit did not complete that curl, and Nynaeve swung wide while Talaan struck straight at her and latched on. Once again, saidar winked out of her, and bonds of air snapped her arms to her sides, fastened her knees. Carefully, she drew breath. She would have to congratulate the young woman. There was no getting out of it. If she had had a hand free, she would have yanked her braid right out of her scalp. Hold, Zyda commanded, rising to stride gracefully toward Nynaeve, her red silk trousers whisking softly above her bare feet, intricately knotted red sash swaying against her thigh. The Windfinders stood with her and followed, in order of rank. Kyra and Tabrela icily ignored one another as they hurried to take places nearest the Wave Mistress, while Senina and Raynon fell a pace to the rear. Obediently, Talaan held the shield on Nynaeve and the bonds, leaving her standing like a statue and fuming like a kettle too long on the boil. She refused to shuffle about, a broken puppet, and that was all that was left to her except standing still. Kyra and Tabrela studied her with icy disdain, Kurin with the hard contempt she had for all land dwellers. The stone-eyed woman did not sneer or grimace or wear any real expression at all, but you could not be with her long without becoming aware of her opinion. Only Raynon displayed the smallest touch of sympathy, a slight rueful smile. Zyda's eyes met Nynaeve's levelly. They were much the same height. She is held as tightly as you can, apprentice? Talaan bowed deeply, parallel to the floor, touching her forehead, lips, and heart. As you commanded, Wave Mistress, she all but whispered. What is the meaning of this? Nynaeve demanded. Let me go. You may get away with treating Marililla this way, but if you think for 1 minute, you say there is no way to break this shield unless you are much stronger. Zyda cut her off. Her tone was not harsh, but she meant to be heard, not to listen. A light willing, we will learn whether you told us correctly. It is well known how Aes Sedai make truth spin like a whirlpool. Windfinders, you will form a circle. Kurin, you will lead. If she does break free, see that she causes no harm. For incentive, apprentice, prepare to turn her upside down at my count of 5. 1. The light of saidar enveloped the Windfinders, all of them together as they linked. Kurin stood with her feet apart and her hands on her hips, as if balancing on the deck of a ship. Her very lack of expression seemed to convey that she was already convinced they would uncover prevarication, if not an outright lie. Talaan drew a deep breath and for once stood very straight, not even blinking as she kept her anxious eyes on Zyda. Nynaeve blinked. No, they could not do this to her. Not again. I am telling you, she said much more calmly than she felt. There is no way for me to break the shield. Talaan is too strong. 2, Zyda said, folding her arms beneath her breasts and staring at Nynaeve as though she really could see the weaves. Nynaeve pushed tentatively at the shield. She might as well push at a stone wall for all the give in it. Listen to me, Wave Mistress. There was certainly no need to antagonize the woman further. They were sticklers for proper forms of address. Sticklers for all too many things. I'm sure Marililla has told you something about shielding, at least. She swore the 3 oaths. She can't lie.
Hey, Shaz,
Maybe
how you
Egwene
doing?
was right about the oath rod.
Hope you're doing
Zyda's
well.
gaze never wavered. Her expression never changed. 3. Listen to me, Nynaeve said, not caring at all if she sounded a bit desperate. Maybe more than just a bit.
I'm not
She
doing
pushed
too
against the
bad.
shield harder,
Can't complain
then as
too
hard as
much.
she could. She might as well have beat her head against a boulder for all the effect it had. Instinctively, uselessly, she struggled in the bonds of air holding her, the fringe and loose folds of her shawl dancing around her. She had as much chance of breaking free of those bonds as she did of breaking through the shield, but she could not stop herself. Not again. She could not face that. You have to listen. 4. No, no, not again. Frantically, she scrabbled at the shield. It might be as hard as stone, but it felt more like glass, sleek and slippery. She could feel the source beyond it, almost see the source like light and warmth just beyond the corner of vision. In desperation, panting, she felt her way across the smooth surface. It had an edge, like a circle at once small enough to hold in her hands and large enough to cover the
Hell
world.
yeah, Shaz,
But when she
that's
attempted
good.
to slip around that edge, she found herself right back in the center of the slick, hard circle again. This was useless. She had learned all this long ago, tried it all long ago. Her heart pounded, fit to burst out of her ribs. Struggling vainly for calm, she hurriedly felt her way back to the edge, felt along it without trying to go around. There was one place where it felt softer. She'd never noticed that before. The soft point, a slight lump, seemed no different in any other way from the rest, and it was not much softer, but she hurled herself at it, and found herself back in the center. In a frenzy, she flung all of her strength at the soft spot, again and again, being hurled back to the center, not even pausing before launching herself at it again. Again. Oh, light, please. She had to before... Abruptly, she realized that Zyda still had not said 5. Gulping air as if she had run 10 miles, she stared. Sweat rolled down her face, her back. It trickled between her breasts, slid down her belly. Her legs wobbled. The wave mistress looked straight into her eyes, thoughtfully tapping full lips with a slim finger. The glow still enveloped the circle of 6. Kurin still could have been a scornfully stony statue, but Zyda had not said 5. Did she truly try as hard as it seemed, Kurin? The wave mistress asked finally. Or was all that thrashing about and whimpering just a show? Nynaeve tried to summon an indignant glare. She had not whimpered, had she? Her scowl, such as it was, made no more impression on Zyda than rain on a rock. With that much effort, wave mistress, Kurin said reluctantly, she could have carried a raker on her back. The flat black pebbles of her eyes still held contempt, though. Only those who lived at sea got any respect from her. Release her, Talaan, Zyda commanded, and shield and bonds vanished as she turned away, starting back toward the chairs without another glance at Nynaeve. Windfinders, I will have words with you after she goes. I will see you at the same hour tomorrow, Nynaeve, said I. Smoothing her rumpled skirts and irritably shaking out her shawl again, Nynaeve attempted to regather a little dignity. It was not easy, sweat-slicked and trembling. She certainly had not whimpered. She tried not to look at the woman who had shielded her. Twice! Standing there meek as butter with her eyes fixed on the carpet. Ha! Nynaeve jerked her shawl around her shoulders. Saritha, said I, will take her turn tomorrow, wave mistress. At least her voice was steady. I will be busy until... Your instruction is more edifying than that of the others, Zyda said, still not bothering to look at her. At the same hour, or I will send your pupils to bring you. You may leave now. And that had the sound of you will leave now. With an effort, Nynaeve swallowed her arguments. They had a bitter taste. More edifying? What did that mean? She did not think she really wanted to know. Until she actually left the room, she was still the teacher. The sea folk were rigid in their rules. Nynaeve supposed that lax rules on ships could lead to trouble, but she wished they would realize they were not on a ship. She was still the teacher, and that meant she could not simply stalk out, however much she wanted to. Worse, their rules were quite specific about teachers from among the shorebound. She could simply have refused to cooperate, she supposed, but if she violated their bargain by a hair, these women would spread it from Tyr to the light knew where. The whole world would know that Aes Sedai had broken their word. What that would do to Aes Sedai's standing did not bear thinking about. Blood and bloody ashes. Egwene was right, and burn her for it. Thank you, Wave Mistress, for allowing me to instruct you, she said, bowing and touching fingers to forehead, lips, and heart. Not a very deep bow, but a quick bob was all they were getting today. Well, two. The Windfinders had to have one. Thank you, Windfinders, for allowing me to instruct you. The sisters who finally went to the Athaan Nier would explode when they learned that their pupils could tell them what to teach and when, and even order what they did when not teaching. On a sea-folk vessel, a land-dwelling teacher outranked the common deckhands, but only just. And the sisters would not even get the fat purses of gold used to lure other teachers on board. Zyda and the Windfinders reacted very much as if the lowest deckhand had announced her departure. That is, they stood in a silent cluster, plainly waiting for her to go, and not very patient about it. Only Rhaenyn favored her with as much as a glance, an impatient glance. She was a Windfinder after all was said and done. Talaan still stood where she had been left, a meek figure gazing at the carpet in front of her bare feet. Head high and back straight, Nynaeve left the room with every shred of dignity she could wrap around herself. Sweaty, rumpled shreds. In the hall, she seized the door in both hands and slammed it as hard as she could. The great echoing crash was very satisfying. She could always say it had slipped out of her hands if anyone complained. It really had, once she got a good swing going. Turning from the door, she dusted her hands with satisfaction and gave a start at who was waiting in the corridor for her. In a simple dark blue dress provided by one of the kinswomen, Olivia did not look at all unusual at first glance. A woman a little taller than Nynaeve, with fine lines at the corners of her blue eyes and threads of white in her golden yellow hair. Those blue eyes crackled with intensity, though, like the eyes of a hawk focused on prey. Mistress Corley sent me to tell you she'd like to see you at dinner tonight, the blue-eyed hawk said in a slow Seanchan drawl. Mistress Caristovan, Mistress Armon, and Mistress Joarda will be there. What are you doing here alone? Nynaeve demanded. She wished she could be like most other sisters, aware of another woman's strength without ever really thinking about it, but that was something else she had not had time to learn. Maybe some of the Forsaken topped Olivia, but surely no one else. And she was Seanchan. Nynaeve wished there was someone else there besides the two of them, even Lan, and she had ordered him to stay away from her lessons with the sea folk. She was not certain he believed her story about slipping on the stairs the other day. You aren't supposed to go anywhere without an escort. Olivia shrugged, a slight movement of one shoulder. A few days ago, she had been a bundle of simpers that made Talaan look bold. She did not simper for anybody now. There wasn't anyone free, so I slipped out by myself. Anyway, if you always guard me, you'll never come to trust me, and I'll never get to kill Suldam. Somehow that sounded even more chilling, delivered in such a casual tone. You ought to be learning from me. Those Ashaman say they're weapons, and they aren't bad, I know for a fact, but I'm better. That's as may be, Nynaeve replied sharply, shifting her shawl. And maybe we know more than you think we do. She would not mind demonstrating a few of the weaves she had learned from Mugadin for this woman, including a few they had all agreed were too nasty to do to anyone. Except she was fairly certain the other woman could overpower her easily, whatever she did. Keeping her feet from shifting under that intense stare was not easy. Unless we decide differently, you won't let me see you without 2 or 3 kinswomen again if you know what's good for you. If you say so, Olivia said, not at all abashed. What message do you want me to take back to Mistress Corley? Tell Mistress Corley I have to decline her kind invitation. And remember what I told you. I'll tell her, the Seanchan woman drawled, completely ignoring the admonition. But I don't think it was exactly an invitation. An hour after first dark, she said. You might want to remember that. With a slight knowing smile, she walked away, not hurrying at all to return where she belonged. Nynaeve glared at the retreating woman's back, and not because of her lack of a curtsy. Well, not only that. A pity she had not hung on to a few of her simpers, for sisters anyway. With a glance at the door that hid the Atha Anmier, Nynaeve considered following Olivia to make sure she did as she had been told. Instead, she went in the opposite direction. She did not hurry. It would be unpleasant if the sea folk came out and decided she had been eavesdropping, but she definitely did not hurry. She merely wanted to walk briskly, that was all. The Atha Anmier were hardly the only ones in the palace she wanted to avoid. Not exactly an invitation, was it? Sumiko, Karistovan, Chilaris, Arman, and Famela Juarda had been in the knitting circle with Rihanna Corley. Dinner was only an excuse. They would want to talk to her about the Windfinders, more specifically about the relationship between the Aes Sedai in the palace and the sea folk Wilders. They would not quite upbraid her for failing to maintain the dignity of the White Tower. They had not gone that far. Not yet, though they seemed to be coming closer. But the whole dinner would be full of pointed questions and sharper comments. Nothing she could simply order them to stop. She doubted they would for less than a command. And they were quite capable of coming to find her if she did not go to them. Trying to teach them to show backbone had been a terrible mistake. At least she was not the only one who had to put up with it, though she thought Elaine had managed to avoid the worst. Oh, how she looked forward to seeing them back in novice white or acceptance dresses. How she looked forward to seeing the last of the Atha Anmier. Nynaeve, came a strangely muted cry behind her, in sea-folk accents. Nynaeve. Forcing her hand away from her braid, Nynaeve spun on her heel, ready to deliver a tongue-lashing. She was not teaching now, they were not on a ship, and they could bloody well leave her alone. Talan skidded to a halt in front of her, bare feet sliding on the dark red floor tiles. Panting, the young woman swiveled her head as if afraid someone would sneak up on her. She flinched every time a liveried servant moved just on the edge of her sight, and only breathed again when she saw it was just a servant. "Can I go to the White Tower?" she asked breathlessly, wringing her hands and dancing from foot to foot. "I will never be chosen. A sacrifice, they call it, leaving the sea forever, but I dream of becoming a novice. I will miss my mother terribly, but please, you must take me to the tower. You must." Nynaeve blinked at the onslaught. Many women dreamed of becoming Aes Sedai, but she had never before heard one say she dreamed of becoming a novice. Besides, the Atha Anmier refused passage to Aes Sedai on any ship whose Windfinder could channel, but to keep sisters from trying to look deeper, every so often an apprentice was chosen to go to the White Tower. Egwene said there were only 3 sisters from among the sea folk at present, all weak in the power. For 3,000 years that had been enough to convince the tower that the ability was rare and small with Atha Anmier women, not worth investigating. Talan was right. No one as strong as she would ever be allowed to go to the tower, even now that their subterfuge was coming to an end. In fact, it was part of the bargain with them that Atha Anmier's sisters be allowed to give up being Aes Sedai and return to the ships. The hall of the tower would not half howl about that. "Well, the training is very hard, Talan," she said gently, "and you must be at least 15. Besides," something else the young woman had said struck her suddenly. "You will miss your mother?" she said incredulously, not caring how it sounded. "I am 19, Talan replied indignantly. Looking at that boyish face and form, Nynaeve was not sure she believed. "And of course I will miss my mother. Do I look unnatural? Oh, I see. You do not understand. We are very affectionate in private, but she must avoid any sign of favor in public. That is a serious crime with us. It could have mother stripped of her rank, and both of us hung upside down in the rigging to be flogged." Nynaeve grimaced at the mention of upside down. "I certainly can see where you would want to avoid that," she said. "Even so, everyone tries to avoid even a hint of favor, but it is worse for me, Nynaeve." Really, the young woman, would have to learn not to step on what a sister was saying if she did become a novice. Not that she could, of course. Nynaeve tried to regain the initiative, but words poured out of Talan in a torrent. "My grandmother is Windfinder to the Wave Mistress of Clan Rosaine. My great-grandmother is Windfinder to Clan Dakan, and her sister to Clan Takana." My family is honored that 5 of us have risen so high, and everyone watches for signs that Gellin abuses its influence. Rightly so, I know. Favor cannot be allowed. But my sister was kept an apprentice 5 years longer than normal, and my cousin 6. Just so no one can claim they were favored. When I cast the stars and give our position correctly, I am punished for being slow, even when I have the answer as fast as Windfinder Avon. When I taste the sea and name the coast we are approaching, I am punished because the taste I name is not quite what Windfinder Avon tastes. I shielded you twice, but tonight I will hang by my ankles for not doing so sooner. I am punished for flaws ignored in others, for flaws I never make because I might. Was your novice training any harder than that, Nynaeve? My novice training, Nynaeve said faintly. She wished the woman would not keep bringing up being hung by the ankles. Yes, well, you really don't want to hear about that. 4 generations of women with the ability? Light. Even daughter following mother was rare enough. The tower really would want Talaan. That was not going to happen, though. I suppose Kyra and Tabrela really love one another too, she said, trying to change the subject. Talaan sneered. My aunt is sly and deceitful. She celebrates any humiliation she can cause my mother. But my mother will bring her low as she deserves. One day Tabrela will find herself serving on a soarer beneath a sail mistress with an iron hand and sore teeth. She gave a grim, satisfied nod at the thought, and then jumped, wide-eyed as a fawn, when a serving man hurried by behind her. That recalled her to her purpose. She went back to trying to look every way at once as she spoke hastily. You cannot speak out during the lessons, of course, but any other time will do. Announce that I am to go to the tower, and they will not be able to deny you. You are Aes Sedai. Nynaeve goggled at the girl, and they would have forgotten all about it by the next time she gave a lesson? The fool had seen what they did to her. I can see how much you want to go, Talaan, she said. But thank you, Talaan broke in, making a quick bow. Thank you, and she darted back the way she had come at a dead run. Wait, Nynaeve shouted, taking a few steps after her. Come back! I didn't promise anything! Servants turned to stare at her and continued to shoot wondering glances in her direction even after returning to their tasks. She would have run after the idiot, except that she was afraid she would have to follow her straight to Zaida and the others, and the fool would probably gush out that she was going to the tower that Nynaeve had promised. Light. She would probably tell them anyway. You look as if you had just swallowed a rotten plum, Lan said, appearing at her side, tall and starkly handsome in his well-fitting green coat. She wondered how long he had been there. It did not seem possible that a man so large, so commanding in his presence, could stand still enough that you failed to notice him, even without a warder's cloak. A basket full of them, she murmured, pressing her face against her husband's broad chest. It felt very good to lean against his strength, just for a moment, while he stroked her hair softly, even if she did have to shift his sword hilt out of her ribs. And anyone who wanted to stare at such a public display of affection could go hang themselves. She could see disaster piling up on disaster. Even if she told Zaida and the others she had no intention of taking Talaan anywhere, they were going to skin her. There would be no hiding it from Lan this time. If she had managed to the first, Rihanna and the others would learn of it. And Elise. They would start treating her the way they did Marililla, ignoring her orders, giving her about as much respect as the Windfinders did Talaan. Somehow she would be saddled with guarding Olivia, and some catastrophe would come of it, some utter humiliation. That was all she seemed fit to do lately, find another way to be humiliated. And every 4th day she would still have to face Zaida and the Windfinders. Do you remember how you kept me in our rooms yesterday morning? She murmured, looking up in time to catch a grin replacing concern on his face. Of course he remembered. Her face grew hot. Talking to friends was one thing, but being forward with her own husband still seemed quite another. Well, I want you to take me back there right now and keep me from putting on any clothes for about a year. She had been quite furious about that at first, but he had ways to make her forget to be furious. He threw back his head and laughed, a great booming sound, and after a moment she echoed him. She wanted to weep, though. She had not really been joking. Having a husband meant that she did not have to share a bed with another woman, or 2, and it gained her a sitting room. It was not large, but it always seemed snug, with a good fireplace and a small table with 4 chairs. Certainly as much as she and Lan needed. Her hopes for privacy were dashed as soon as they entered the sitting room, though. The first maid was waiting in the middle of the flowered carpet, as stately as a queen, as neatly turned out as if she had just finished dressing, and not at all pleased. And in one corner of the room was a roughly dressed, lumpy fellow with a horrible wart on his nose and a scrip dangling heavily from his shoulder. "This man claims he has something you want urgently," Mistress Harford said once she had made brief courtesies. Very brief, if proper. She did not waste them on anyone except Elaine. She sounded equally disapproving of Nynaeve and the fellow with the wart. "I don't mind telling you I do not like the looks of him." Tired as Nynaeve was, embracing the source was almost beyond her, but she managed it in a flash, spurred by thoughts of assassins and the light knew what. Lan must have caught some change in her face because he took a step toward the warty fellow. He did not touch his sword, but suddenly his whole stance seemed as if the blade were already drawn. How he sometimes managed to read her mind when another held his bond she could not say, but she was pleased. She had managed to match Talan, in strength at least, but she was not sure she could channel enough right then to knock over a chair. "I never," she began. "Pardon, mistress," the lumpy fellow muttered hurriedly, tugging his greasy forelock. "Mistress Thane said you wanted to see me right away. A women's circle business, she said. Something about Senbui." Nynaeve gave herself a shake, and after a moment remembered to close her mouth. "Yes," she said slowly, staring at the fellow. Seeing anything but that awful wart was difficult, but she was certain she had never laid eyes on him before. Women's circle business. No man would be allowed a sniff of that. It was secret. She held on to Saidar, though. "I remember now. Thank you, Mistress Harford. I'm sure you have all sorts of things to see to." Rather than take the hint, the first maid hesitated, frowning at her suspiciously. That frown slid around to the lumpy man, then settled on Lan and vanished. She nodded to herself, as if his presence somehow made the difference. "I will leave you, then. I'm sure Lord Lan can handle this fellow." Stifling her indignation, Nynaeve barely waited for the door to close before rounding on the lumpy fellow and his wart. "Who are you?" she demanded. "How do you know those names? You're no two The man rippled. There was no other word for it. He rippled and stretched taller, and suddenly it was Rand, grimacing and swallowing, in rumpled woolens with those awful heads glittering red and gold on the backs of his hands, and a leather scrip on his shoulder. Where had he learned that? Who had taught him? She resisted the idea of disguising herself just for a moment to show him she could do as much. "I see you didn't take your own advice," Rand said to Lan, just as if she were not there. "But why do you let her pretend to be Aes Sedai? Even if the real Aes Sedai let her, she can get hurt." "Because she is Aes Sedai, sheepherder," Lan replied quietly. He did not look at her either, and he still seemed ready to draw his sword in a heartbeat. "As for the other, sometimes she is stronger than you. Did you take it?" Rand looked at her then, to frown disbelievingly, even when she pointedly adjusted her shawl so the yellow fringe swayed. What he said, though, shaking his head slowly, was, "No, you're right. Sometimes you're just too weak to do what you should." "What are you two blathering about?" she said sharply. "Just things that men talk about," Lan replied. "You wouldn't understand," Rand said. She sniffed at that. Gossip and idle chatter. That was what men's talk was, 9 times in 10, at best. Wearily, she let go of Saidar, reluctantly. She did not need to protect herself against Rand, certainly, but she would have liked to hold on a little longer, just to touch it, tired or not. "We know about Kyrian, Rand," she said, sinking gratefully into a chair. "Those cursed sea folk had worn her out. Is that why you're here, dressed that way? If you're trying to hide from whoever it was..." He looked tired. Harder than she remembered, but very tired. He remained standing, though. Strangely, he seemed much like Lan, ready to draw a sword he was not wearing. Maybe that attempt to kill him would be enough to make him see sense. "Rand, Egwene can help you." I'm not hiding exactly, he said. At least just until I kill some men who need killing. Light. He was as matter-of-fact about it as Olivia. Why did he and Lan keep eyeing one another and pretending they were not? Anyway, how could Egwene help? He went on, setting the scrip on the table. It made a soft but solid sound of weight inside. I suppose she's Aes Sedai too? He sounded amused. Is she here as well? You three and 2 real Aes Sedai. Only 2. No, I don't have time for that. I need you to keep something until... Egwene is the Amerlin's seat, you fool woolhead, she growled. It was nice to be able to interrupt someone else for a change. Elida is a usurper. I hope you've had sense enough not to go near her. You wouldn't leave that meeting on your own 2 legs, I can tell you. There are 5 real Aes Sedai here, including me, and 300 more with Egwene and an army ready to pull Elida down. Look at yourself. Whatever your brave talk, somebody almost killed you and you're sneaking around dressed like a stableman. What safer place for you than with Egwene? Even those Ashaman of yours wouldn't dare go against 300 sisters. Oh, yes, very nice indeed. He tried to mask his surprise, but he made a poor job of it, staring at her. You'd be surprised what my Ashaman would dare, he said dryly after a minute. I suppose Matt is with Egwene's army? Putting a hand to his head, he staggered. Only half a step, but she was out of her chair before he could right himself. Embracing Saidar with an effort, she reached up to clasp his head between her hands and laboriously wove a delving around him. She had tried finding a better way to find what ailed someone so far without success. It was enough. No sooner had the weave settled on him than her breath caught. She had known about the wound in his side from Falma, never healing completely, resisting all the healing she knew, like a pustule of evil in his flesh. Now there was a half-healed wound atop the old, and that pulsed with evil too. A different sort of evil, somehow, like a mirror of the other, yet just as virulent. And she could not touch either with the power. She did not really want to. Just thinking of it made her skin crawl, but she tried. And something unseen held her away, like a ward. A ward she could not see. A ward of Saidin? That made her stop channeling and step back. She clung to the source. No matter how tired she was, she would have had to force herself to let go. No sister could think of the male half of the power without at least a touch of fear. He looked down at her calmly, and that made her shiver. He seemed another man entirely from the Rand al'Thor she had watched grow up. She was very glad that Lan was there, hard as that was to admit. Suddenly she realized that he had not relaxed by a whisper. He might chatter with Rand like 2 men over pipes and ale, but he thought Rand was dangerous, and Rand looked at Lan as if he knew it and accepted it. None of that is important now, Rand said, turning to the scrip on the table. She did not know whether he meant his wounds or where Matt was. From the scrip he produced 2 statuettes a foot high, a wise-looking bearded man and an equally wise and serene woman, each in flowing robes and holding aloft a clear crystal sphere. From the way he handled them, they were heavier than they appeared. I want you to keep these hidden for me until I send for them, Nynaeve. One hand on the figure of the woman, he hesitated. And for you. I'll need you when I use them. When we use them. After I take care of those men. That has to come first. Use them? She said suspiciously. Why did killing anyone have to come first? That was hardly the important question, though. For what? Are they ter'angreal? He nodded. With this you can touch the greatest sa'angreal ever made for a woman. It's buried on Tremalking, I understand, but that doesn't matter. His hand moved to the figure of the man. With this one, I can touch its male twin. I was told by someone once that a man and woman using those sa'angreal could challenge the Dark One. They might have to be used for that one day, but in the meantime I hope they're enough to cleanse the male half of the source. If it could be done, wouldn't they have done it in the Age of Legends? Lan said quietly. Quiet the way steel sliding from a scabbard was quiet. You said once that I could get her hurt. It seemed impossible his voice could grow any harder, but it did. You could kill her, sheepherder. And his tone made clear that he would not allow that. Rand met Lan's cold blue stare with one just as cold. I don't know why they didn't. I don't care why. It has to be tried. Nynaeve bit her lower lip. She supposed Rand made this a public occasion. Shifting from public to private, deciding which was which, made her dizzy sometimes. But she did not care that Lan had spoken out of turn. He was bad that way in any case, but she liked an outspoken man. She needed to think. Not about her decision. She had made that. About how to implement it. Rand might not like it. Lan certainly would not. Well, men always wanted their own way. Sometimes you just had to teach them they could not always have it. I think it is a wonderful idea, she said. That was not exactly a lie. It was wonderful, compared to the alternatives. But I don't see why I should sit here waiting for your summons like a serving maid. I'll do it, but we all go together. She had been right. They did not like it one bit. Chapter 12. A Lily in Winter. Another serving man nearly fell on his nose, bowing, and Elaine sighed as she glided past along the palace corridor. At least she tried to glide. The daughter heir of Andor, stately and serene. She wanted to run, though her dark blue skirts probably would have tripped her had she tried. She could almost feel the stout man's goggling eyes following her and her companions. A minor irritant and one that would pass, a grain of sand in her slipper. Rand bloody thinks he knows best for everybody. Althor is itch oak down my back, she thought. If he managed to get away from her this time. Just remember, she said firmly, he hears nothing about spies or Forkroot or any of that. The very last thing she needed was him deciding to rescue her. Men did that sort of nonsense, Nynaeve called it, thinking with the hair on their chests. Light. He would probably try to move the Aiel and the Saldaeans back into the city, into the palace itself. Bitter as it was to admit, she could not stop him if he did, not short of open war, and even that might not be enough. I don't tell him things he doesn't need to know, Min said, frowning at a lanky, wide-eyed serving woman whose curtsy nearly collapsed into a sprawl on the red-brown floor tiles. Eyeing Min sideways, Elaine remembered her own time wearing breeches and wondered whether she might not try again. They were certainly freer than skirts. Not the heeled boots, though, she decided judiciously. They made Min almost as tall as Avienda, but even Brigitte swayed in those, and with Min's snug breeches and a coat that barely covered her hips, it looked positively scandalous. You lie to him? Suspicion larded Avienda's tone. Even the way she adjusted her dark shawl on her shoulders carried disapproval, and she glared past Elaine at Min. Of course not, Min replied sharply, glaring right back. Not unless it's necessary. Avienda chuckled, then looked startled that she had, and put on a stony face. What was she to do about them? They had to like one another. They just had to. But the two women had been staring at each other like strange cats in a small room ever since they met. Oh, they had agreed to everything. There really had been no choice, not when none of them could guess when they would all have the man at hand again. But she hoped they did not show one another again how skillfully they handled their knives. Very casually, not actually implying any threat, but very open about it, too. On the other hand, Avienda had been quite impressed with the number of knives Min carried about her person. A gangly young serving man carrying a tray of tall mantles for the stand lamps bowed as she swept by. Unfortunately, he was staring so hard that he forgot to pay attention to his burden. The crash of glass shattering on the floor tiles filled the corridor. Elaine sighed again. She did hope everyone became used to the new order of things soon. She was not the object of all that gaping, of course, or Avienda, or even Min, though she probably drew some. No, it was Casella and Denny, following close behind, who were making eyes pop and servants stumble. She had 8 bodyguards now, and those 2 had been standing guard at her door when she woke. Very likely some of the gaping was just that Elaine had guardswomen trailing behind her at all, and almost certainly that they were women. No one was used to that yet. But Brigitte had said she would make them appear ceremonial, and she had. She must have set every seamstress and milliner in the palace working as soon as she left Elaine's rooms the night before. Each woman wore a bright red hat with a long white plume lying flat along the wide brim, and a wide red sash edged in snowy lace across her chest, with rampant white lions marching up it. Their white-collared crimson coats were silk, and the cut had been altered a little, so they fit better and hung almost to the knee above scarlet breeches with a white stripe up the outsides of the legs. Pale lace hung thickly at their wrists and necks, and their black boots had been waxed till they shone. They looked quite dashing, and even placid-eyed Denny swaggered just a little. Elaine suspected they would be even prouder once the sword belts and scabbards with gold tooling were ready, and the lacquered helmets and breastplates. Brigida was having breastplates made to fit women, which Elaine suspected had certainly made the palace armorer's eyes pop. At the moment, Brigida was busy interviewing women to round out the 20 for the bodyguard. Elaine could feel her concentrating with no sign of physical activity, so it must be that, unless she was reading or playing stones, and she seldom took a moment away from her duties for herself. Elaine hoped she would keep it to just 20. She hoped Brigida was busy enough that she did not notice until too late when she masked the bond. To think that she had been so worried about Brigida sensing what she did not want her to, when the solution lay in a simple question to Vandine. The answer had been a rueful reminder how little she actually knew about being Aes Sedai, especially the parts other sisters took for granted. Apparently every sister who had a warder knew how, even those who remained celibate.
Hey, Soy, how you doing?
It was odd how things came about sometimes. If not for the bodyguards,
Good
if
to
not
see
for
ya.
wondering how she could manage to elude them and Brigida, she would never have thought to ask, would never have learned the masking in time for this. Not that she planned to elude her guards any time soon, but it was best to be prepared in advance of need. Brigida certainly was not going to allow her and Avienda to wander the city alone, day or night, not any longer. Their arrival at Nynaeve's door put thoughts of Brigida completely out of her head, except that she must not mask the bond until the very last instant. Rand was on the other side of that door. Rand, who sometimes crowded her thoughts until she wondered whether she was like some fool woman in a story who threw her head over the wall because of a man. She had always thought those stories must have been written by men. Only Rand sometimes did make her feel witless. At least he did not realize it, thank the light. "Wait out here and admit no one," she commanded the guards women. She could not afford interruptions or attention now. With luck, her bodyguard was new enough that no one would even recognize what their fine uniforms meant. "I will only be a few minutes." They saluted briskly, an arm across the chest, and took positions on either side of the door. Casela stone-faced with a hand on her sword hilt, Denny taking her long cudgel in both hands and smiling faintly. Elaine was sure the stocky woman thought Min had brought her here to meet a secret lover. She suspected Casela might as well. They had hardly been as discreet in front of the two women as they might have. No one had mentioned his name, but there had been more than enough of he this and he that. At least neither had tried making an excuse to leave so she could report to Brigida. If they were her bodyguard, then they were her bodyguard, not Brigida's.
It's just heating up
Except
right
that
now.
they would not keep Brigida out if she masked the bond too soon. And she was dithering, she realized. The man she dreamed of every night was on the other side of that door, and she was standing there like a witling. She had waited so long, wanted so much, and now she was almost afraid. She would not let this go wrong. With an effort, she gathered herself. "Are you ready?" Her voice was not as strong as she could have hoped, but at least it did not tremble. Butterflies the size of foxes fluttered in her stomach. That had not happened in a long time. "Of course," Avienda said, but she had to swallow first. "I'm ready," Min said faintly. They went in without knocking, hurriedly closing the door behind them. Nynaeve jumped to her feet, wide-eyed, before they were well into the sitting room, but Elaine barely noticed her or Lan, though the sweet smell of the warder's pipe filled the room. Rand really was there. It had been hard to believe he would be. That dreadful disguise Min had described was gone, except for the shabby clothing and rough gloves, and he was beautiful. He leaped from his chair at the sight of her, too, But before he was completely upright, he staggered and grabbed the table with both hands, gagging and heaving with dry wretchedness. Elaine embraced the source and took a step toward him, then stopped and made herself let go of the power. Her ability with healing was tiny, and anyway, Nynaeve had moved as quickly as she, the shine of Sidar suddenly around her, hands raised toward Rand. He recoiled, waving her away. "It's nothing you can heal, Nynaeve," he said roughly. "In any case, it seems you win the argument." His face was a rigid mask hiding emotion, but his eyes seemed to Elaine to be drinking her in, and Avienda as well. She was surprised to feel gladdened by that. She had hoped it would be that way, hoped she could manage for her sister's sake, and now it took no managing at all. Straightening up was a visible effort for him, and pulling his gaze away from her and Avienda, though he tried to hide both. "It is past time to be gone, Min," he said. Elaine's jaw dropped. "You think you can just go without even speaking to me? To us?" she managed. "Men." Min and Avienda breathed at almost the same instant and gave one another startled looks. Hastily, they unfolded their arms. For an instant, despite the disparity in just about everything about them, they had been almost mirror images of womanly disgust. "The men who tried to kill me in Karian would turn this palace into a slag heap if they knew I was here," Rand said quietly. "Maybe if they just suspected. I suppose Min told you it was Ashaman. Don't trust any of them, except for 3, maybe. Dama Flynn, Jahar Narishma, and Eben Hopwell. You may be able to trust them. For the rest..." He clenched gauntleted fists at his sides, seemingly unaware. "Sometimes a sword turns in your hand, but I still need a sword. Just stay away from any man in a black coat. Look, there's no time for talking. It's best I go quickly." She had been wrong. He was not exactly as she had dreamed of him. There had been a boyishness about him sometimes, but it was gone as if burned away. She mourned that for him. She did not think he did, or could. "He is right in one thing," Rand said around his pipe stem with the same sort of quiet. Another man who seemed never to have been a boy. His eyes were blue ice beneath the braided leather cord that encircled his brows. "Anyone near him is in great danger. Anyone." For some reason, Nynaeve snorted, then put her hand on the leather scrip with hard bulges lying on the table and smiled, though after a moment her smile faltered. "Do my first sister and I fear danger?" Avienda demanded, planting her fists on her hips. Her shawl slipped from her shoulders and fell to the floor, but she was so intent that she seemed unaware of the loss. "This man has told to us, Annaline, and we to him. It must be worked out." Min spread her hands. "I don't know what anybody's toes have to do with anything, or feet either, but I'm not going anywhere until you talk to them, Rand." She affected not to notice Avienda's outraged glare. Sighing, Rand leaned against a corner of the table and raked gloved fingers through the dark reddish curls that hung to his neck. He seemed to be arguing with himself under his breath. "I'm sorry you ended up with the Suldam and Damani," he said finally. He did sound sorry, but not very. He might have been regretting the cold. "Taim was supposed to deliver them to the sisters I thought were with you. But I suppose anyone can make a mistake like that. Maybe he thought all those wisdoms and wise women Nynaeve has gathered were Aes Sedai." His smile was quiet. It did not touch his eyes. "Rand," Min said in a low, warning tone. He had the nerve to look at her questioningly, as if he did not understand, and he went right on. "Anyway, you seem to have enough of them to hold on to a handful of women until you can turn them over to the other sisters, the ones with Egwene. Things never turn out quite the way you expect, do they? Who would have thought a few sisters running away from Elida would grow into a rebellion against the White Tower, with Egwene as Amerlin, and the Band of the Red Hand for her army? I suppose Matt can stay there a while." For some reason he blinked and touched his forehead, then went on in that irritatingly casual tone. "Well, a strange turn of events all around. At this rate, I won't be surprised if my friends in the tower work up enough courage to come out in the open." Arching an eyebrow, Elaine glanced at Nynaeve. Wisdoms and wise women? The band was Egwene's army, and Matt was with it? Nynaeve's attempt at wide-eyed innocence made her look like guilt nailed to a door. Elaine supposed it did not matter. He would learn the truth soon enough, if he could be talked into going to Egwene. In any case, she had more important matters to take up with him. The man was babbling, however offhand he managed to sound, tossing out anything they might snap at in hopes of diverting them. "It won't do, Rand." Elaine tightened her hands on her skirts to keep herself from shaking a finger at him. Or a fist. She was not sure which it would be. The other sisters? The real Aes Sedai, he had been about to say. How dare he? And his friends in the tower? Could he still believe Alviarin's strange letter? Her voice was cool and firm and steady, brooking no nonsense. "None of that matters a hair, not now. You and Avienda and Min and I are what we need to talk about. And we will. We all will, Rand al'Thor, and you are not leaving the palace until we do." For the longest time, he simply looked at her, his expression never changing. Then he inhaled audibly, and his face turned to granite. "I love you, Elaine." Without a pause, he went on, words rushing out of him, water from a burst dam, and his face a stone wall. "I love you, Avienda. I love you, Min. And not one a whisker more or less than the other two. I don't just want one of you, I want all three. So there you have it. I'm a lecher. Now you can walk away and not look back. It's madness anyway. I can't afford to love anybody." "Rand al'Thor!" Nynaeve shrieked. "That is the most outrageous thing I ever heard out of your mouth. The very idea of telling 3 women you love them. You're worse than a lecher. You apologize right now." Lan had snatched his pipe from his mouth and was staring at Rand. "I love you, Rand," Elaine said simply. "And although you haven't asked, I want to marry you." She blushed faintly, but she intended to be much more forward before very long, so she supposed this hardly counted. Nynaeve's mouth worked, but no sound came out. "My heart is in your hands, Rand," Avienda said, treating his name like something rare and precious. "If you make a bridal wreath for my first sister and me, I will pick it up." And she blushed, too, trying to cover it in bending to take her shawl from the floor and arranging it on her arms. By Aiel customs, she should never have said any of that. Nynaeve finally got a sound out, a squeak. "If you don't know by this time that I love you," Min said, "then you're blind, deaf, and dead." She certainly did not blush. There was a mischievous light in her dark eyes, and she seemed ready to laugh. "And as for marriage, well, we'll work that out between the 3 of us, so there." Nynaeve took a grip on her braid with both hands and gave it a steady pull, breathing heavily through her nose. Lan had begun an intense study of the contents of his pipe's bowl. Rand examined the 3 of them as if he had never seen a woman before, and wondered what they were. "You're all mad," he said finally. "I'd marry any of you. All of you, the light help me. But it can't be, and you know it." Nynaeve collapsed into a chair, shaking her head. She muttered to herself, though all Elaine could understand was something about the women's circles swallowing their tongues. "There is something else we need to discuss," Elaine said. Light. Min and Avienda could have been looking at a pastry. With an effort, she managed to make her own smile a little less eager. "In my rooms, I think. There's no need to bother Nynaeve and Lan." Or rather, she was afraid that Nynaeve would try to stop them if she heard. The woman was very quick to use her authority when it came to Aes Sedai matters. "Yes," Rand said slowly, and then, strangely, added, "I said you'd won, Nynaeve. I won't leave without seeing you again." "Oh," Nynaeve gave a start. "Yes, of course not. I watched him grow up," she blathered, turning a sickly smile on Elaine. "Almost from the start. Watched his first steps. He can't go without a good long talk with me." Elaine eyed her suspiciously. Light. She sounded for all the world like an aged nurse, though Leni had never babbled. She hoped Leni was alive and well, but she was very much afraid that neither was true. Why was Nynaeve carrying on in this fashion? The woman was up to something, and if she was not going to use her standing to carry it off, it was something even she knew was wrong. Suddenly Rand seemed to waver, as though the air around him were shimmering with heat, and everything else flew out of Elaine's head. In an instant, he was someone else, shorter and thicker, coarse and brutish, and so repulsive to look at that she did not even consider the fact that he was using the male half of the power. Greasy black hair hung down onto an unhealthily pale face dominated by hairy warts, including one on a bulbous nose above thick, slack lips that appeared on the edge of drooling. He squeezed his eyes shut and swallowed, hands gripping the arms of his chair, as if he could not stand to see them look at him. "You are still beautiful, Rand," she said gently. "Ha," Min said. "That face would make a goat faint." Well, it would, but she should not have said so. Avienda laughed. "You have a sense of humor, Min Farshaw. That face would make a herd of goats faint." "Oh, Light, it would." Elaine swallowed a giggle just in time. "I am who I am," Rand said, pushing himself up out of the chair. "You just won't see it." At Denny's first sight of Rand in his disguise, the smile slid crookedly off the stocky woman's face. Casela's mouth dropped open. So much for thoughts of secret lovers, Elaine thought, laughing to herself in amusement. She was sure he drew as many stares as the guardswomen, shambling along between them with a sullen scowl. Certainly no one could suspect who he was. The servants in the corridors probably thought he had been apprehended in some crime. He certainly had the look. Casela and Denny kept a hard eye on him, as if they thought so, too. The guardswoman came near to arguing when they realized she intended them to wait outside her apartments while the three of them took him inside. Suddenly, Rand's disguise did not seem amusing at all any longer. Casela's mouth thinned, and Denny's wide face set in stubborn displeasure. Elaine almost had to wave her great serpent ring beneath their noses before they took positions beside her door, scowling. She shut the door softly, cutting off the sight of their frowns, but she wanted to slam it. Light. The man could have chosen something a little less unsavory for his disguise. And as for him, he went straight to the inlaid table, leaning against it while the air around him shimmered, and he became himself once more. The dragons' heads on the backs of his hands glittered metallically, scarlet and gold. "I need a drink," he muttered thickly, catching sight of the tall-necked silver pitcher on the long side table against the wall. Still not looking at her or Min or Avienda, he walked over unsteadily and filled the silver wine cup that he half-drained in one long swallow. That sweet, spicy wine had been left when her breakfast was taken away. It must be cold as ice by now. She had not been expected to return to her room so soon, and the fire on the hearth had been banked down between ashes. But he made no move she could see to warm the wine by channeling. She would have seen steam, at least. And why had he walked to the wine instead of channeling to bring it to him? That was the sort of thing he always did, floating wine cups and lamps about on flows of air. "Are you well, Rand?" Elaine asked. "I mean, are you sick?" Her stomach tightened at the thought of what sickness it might be with him. "Nynaeve can—" "I'm as fine as I can be," he said flatly, still with his back to them. Emptying the cup, he began to fill it again. "Now what is it you don't want Nynaeve to hear?" Elaine's eyebrows shot up, and she exchanged looks with Avienda and Min. If he had seen through her subterfuge, Nynaeve certainly had. Why had she let them go? And how had he seen through it? Avienda shook her head slightly in wonder. Min shook hers too, but with a grin that said you just had to expect this sort of thing now and then. Elaine felt the smallest stab of not quite jealousy. Jealousy was out of the question for them. Just irritation that Min had had so much time with him and she had not. Well, if he wanted to play surprises. "We want to bond you our warder," she said, smoothing her dress under her as she took a chair. Min sat on the edge of the table, legs dangling, and Avienda settled onto the carpet cross-legged, carefully spreading out her heavy woolen skirts. "All three of us. It is customary to ask first." He spun around, wine sloshing out of his cup, more pouring from the pitcher before he could bring it upright. With a muttered oath, he hastily stepped out of the spreading wetness on the carpet and put the pitcher back on the tray. A large damp spot decorated the front of his rough coat, and droplets of dark wine that he tried to brush away with his free hand. Very satisfactory. "You really are mad," he growled. "You know what's ahead of me. You know what it means for anyone I'm bonded to. Even if I don't go insane, she has to live through me dying. And what do you mean, all three of you? Min can't channel. Anyway, Alana Mosvani got there ahead of you, and she didn't bother asking. She and Varen were taking some Two Rivers girls to the White Tower. I've been bonded to her for months now." "And you kept it from me, you wool-headed sheep-herder?" Min demanded. "If I'd known—" She deftly produced a slim knife from her sleeve, then glared at it and glumly put it back. That cure would have been as hard on Rand as on Alana. "This was against custom," Avienda said, half questioning. She shifted on the carpet and fingered her belt knife. "Very much so," Elaine replied grimly. That a sister would do that to any man was disgusting. That Alana had done it to Rand. She remembered the dark, fiery green with her quicksilver humor and her quicksilver temper. "Alana has more taught to him than she could repay in a lifetime, and to us. Even if she doesn't, she will wish I had just killed her after I lay hands on her." "After we lay hands on her," Avienda said, nodding for emphasis. "So," Rand peered into his wine, "you can see there's no point in this. I think I'd better go back to Nynaeve now. Are you coming, Min?" Despite what they had told him, he sounded as though he did not really believe, as if Min might abandon him now. He did not sound afraid of it, only resigned. "There is a point," Elaine said insistently. She leaned toward him, trying by the force of her will to make him accept what she was saying. "One bond doesn't ward you against another. Sisters don't bond the same man because of custom, Rand, because they don't want to share him, not because it can't be done. And it isn't against Tower law either. Of course, some customs were strong as law, at least in the eyes of the sisters. Nynaeve seemed to go on more every day about upholding Aes Sedai customs and dignity. When she learned of this, she would probably explode right through the roof. Well, we do want to share you. We will share you, if you agree." How easy it was to say that. She had been sure she could not, once, until she came to realize that she loved Avienda as much as she did him, just in a different way. And Min, too, another sister, even if they had not adopted one another. She would stripe Alana from top to bottom for touching him, given the chance, but Avienda and Min were different. They were part of her. In a way, they were her, and she them. She softened her tone. "I am asking, Rand. We are asking. Please let us bond you." "Min," he murmured, almost accusingly. His eyes on Min's face were filled with despair. "You knew, didn't you? You knew if I laid eyes on them." He shook his head, unable or unwilling to go on. "I didn't know about the bonding until they told me less than an hour ago," she said, meeting his gaze with the most gentle look Elaine had ever seen. "But I knew, I hoped, what would happen if you saw them again. Some things have to be, Rand. They have to be." Rand stared into the wine cup, moments seeming to stretch like hours, and at last set it back on the tray. "All right," he said quietly. "I can't say I do not want this, because I do. The light burned me for it. But think of the cost. Think of the price you'll pay." Elaine did not need to think of the price. She had known it from the beginning, had discussed it with Avienda to make sure she understood, too. She had explained it to Min. Take what you want and pay for it, the old saying went. None of them had to think about the price. They knew, and they were willing to pay. There was no time to waste, though. Even now, she did not put it past him to decide that price was too high, as if that were his decision to make. Opening herself to Saidar, she linked with Avienda, sharing a smile with her. The increased awareness of one another, the more intimate sharing of emotions and physical feelings, was always a pleasure with her sister. It was very much like what they would soon share with Rand. She had worked this out carefully, studied it from every angle. What she had been able to learn of the Aiel adoption weaves had been a great help. That ceremony had been when the idea first came to her. Carefully she wove spirit, a flow of over 100 threads, every thread placed just so, and laid the weave on Avienda sitting on the floor, then did the same to Min on the table's edge. In a way, they were not two separate weaves at all. They glowed with a precise similarity, and it seemed that looking at one, she saw the other as well. These were not the weaves used in the adoption ceremony, but they used the same principles. They included. What happened to one meshed in that weave happened to all in it. As soon as the weaves were in place, she passed the lead of the circle of two to Avienda. The weaves already made remained, and Avienda immediately wove identical weaves around Elaine and around Min again, blending that one until it was indistinguishable from Elaine's before passing control back. They did that very easily now, after a great deal of patience. 4 weaves, or rather 3 now, yet they all seemed the same weave. Everything was ready. Avienda was a rock of confidence as strong as anything Elaine had ever felt from Brigitte. Min sat gripping the edge of the table, her ankles locked together. She could not see the flows, but she gave an assured grin that was only spoiled a little when she licked her lips. Elaine breathed deeply. To her eyes, they 3 were surrounded and connected by a tracery of spirit that made the finest lace seem drab. Now, if only it worked as she believed it would. From each of them, she extended the weave in narrow lines toward Rand, twisting the 3 lines into one, changing it into the warder bond. That she laid on Rand as softly as if she were laying a blanket on a baby. The spider web of spirit settled around him, settled into him. He did not even blink, but it was done. She let go of Saidar. Done. He stared at them, expressionless, and slowly put his fingers to his temples. "Oh, light, Rand, the pain," Min murmured in a hurt voice. "I never knew. I never imagined. How can you stand it? There are pains you don't even seem to know, as if you've lived with them so long they're part of you. Those herons on your hands, you can still feel the branding. Those things on your arms hurt. And your side. Oh, light, your side. Why aren't you crying, Rand? Why aren't you crying?" "He is the Karakan," Avienda said, laughing. "As strong as the threefold land itself." Her face was proud. Oh, so proud. But even as she laughed, tears streamed down her sun-dark cheeks. "The veins of gold. Oh, the veins of gold. You do love me, Rand." Elaine simply stared at him, felt him in her head. The pain of wounds and hurts he really had forgotten, the tension and disbelief, the wonder. His emotions were too rigid, though, like a knot of hardened pine sap, almost stone. Yet laced through them, golden veins pulsed and glowed whenever he looked at Min, or Avienda, or her. He did love her. He loved all 3 of them, and that made her want to laugh with joy. Other women might find doubts, but she would always know the truth of his love. "The lights send you know what you've done," he said in a low voice. "The lights send you aren't—" The pine sap grew a trifle harder. He was sure they would be hurt, and was already steeling himself. I have to go now. At least I'll know you are all well now. I won't have to worry about you." Suddenly he grinned. He might have looked almost boyish if it had reached his eyes. "Nynaeve will be frantic thinking I've slipped away without seeing her. Not that she doesn't deserve a little flustering." "There is one more thing, Rand," Elaine said, and stopped to swallow. Light. She had thought this would be the easy part. "I suppose Avienda and I have to talk while we can," Min said hurriedly, springing off the table. "Somewhere we can be alone, if you'll excuse us." Avienda rose from the carpet gracefully, smoothing her skirts. "Yes, Min Farshaw and I must learn about one another." She eyed Min doubtfully, adjusting her shawl, but they left arm in arm. Rand watched them warily, as if he knew their leaving had been planned. A cornered wolf. But those veins of gold gleamed in her head. "There is something they have had from you that I haven't," Elaine began, and choked, a flush scalding her face. Blood and ashes. How did other women go about this? Carefully, she considered the bundle of sensations in her head that was him, and the bundle that was Birgitta. There was still no change in the second. She imagined wrapping it in a kerchief, knotting the kerchief snugly, and Birgitta was gone. There was only Rand, and those shining golden wings. Butterflies the size of wolfhounds drummed their wings in her middle. Swallowing hard, she took a long breath. "You will have to help me with my buttons," she said unsteadily. "I cannot take this dress off by myself." The two guardswomen stirred when Min came into the corridor with the Aiel woman and jerked erect when they realized, as Min closed the door, that no one else was coming out. "Her taste can't be that bad," the blocky, sleepy-eyed one muttered under her breath, hands tightening on her long cudgel. Min did not think anyone had been meant to hear. "Too much courage and too much innocence," the lean, mannish one growled. "The Captain General warned us about that." She put a gauntleted hand on the lion-headed door latch. "You go in there now and she might skin you, too," Min said blithely. "Have you ever seen her in a temper? She could make a bear weep." Avienda disengaged her arm from Min's and put a little distance between them. It was the guardswoman who received her scowl, though. "You doubt my sister can handle a single man? She is Aes Sedai and has the heart of a lion, and you are oath sworn to follow her. You follow where she leads, not put your noses up her sleeve." The guardswomen exchanged a long look. The heavier woman shrugged. The wiry one grimaced, but she took her hand from the door latch. "I'm oath sworn to keep that girl alive," she said in a hard voice, "and I mean to. Now you children go play with your dolls and let me do my job." Min considered producing a knife and performing one of the flashy finger rolls Tom Marilyn had taught her, just to show them who was a child. The lean woman was not young, but there was no gray in her hair, and she looked quite strong and quick. Min wanted to believe some of the other woman's bulk was fat, but she did not. She could not see any images or auras around either, but neither looked in the least afraid to do whatever she thought needed doing. Well, at least they were leaving Elaine and Rand alone. Maybe the knife was unnecessary. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of the Aiel reluctantly letting a hand fall from her belt knife. If the woman did not stop mirroring her this way, she was going to start thinking there was more to this jiggery-pokery with the power than she had been told. Then again, it had begun before the jiggery-pokery. Maybe they just thought alike. A disturbing idea. Light. All this talk about him marrying all three of them was very well for talk, but which one was he really going to marry? "Elaine is brave," she told the guards. "As brave as anybody I've ever met. And she isn't stupid. If you start off thinking she is, you'll soon go wrong with her." They stared down at her from the vantage of an added 15 or 20 years, solid, unperturbed, and determined. In a moment they would tell her to run along again. "Well, we can't stand around here if we're going to talk, can we, Avienda?" "No," the Aiel woman breathed in a tight voice, glaring at the guardswomen. "We cannot stand here." The guardswomen took no notice of their going at all. They had a job to do, and it had nothing to do with watching Elaine's friends. Min hoped they did their job well. She isn't at all stupid, she thought. She just lets her courage lead the way sometimes. She hoped they would not let Elaine scramble into brambles she could not get out of. Walking along the hallway, she eyed the Aiel woman sideways. Avienda strode along as far from her as she could be and still remain in the same corridor. Not even glancing in Min's direction, she pulled a thickly carved ivory bracelet from her belt pouch and slipped it over her left wrist with a small, satisfied smile. She had had a fly on her nose from the first, and Min did not understand why. Aiel were supposed to be used to women sharing a man. A far cry more than she could say for herself. She just loved him so badly she was willing to share, and if she must, then there was no one in the world she would rather share with than Elaine. With her, it almost wasn't like sharing at all. This Aiel woman was a stranger, though. Elaine had said it was important they get to know one another, but how could they if the woman would not talk to her? She did not spend much time worrying about Elaine, though, or Avienda. What lay in her head was too wondrous. Rand, a little ball that told her everything about him. She had been sure the whole thing would fail, for her at least. What would making love with him be like after this, when she knew everything? Light. Of course, he would know everything about her, too. She was definitely uncertain how she felt about that. Abruptly, she realized that the bundle of emotions and sensations was no longer the same as at first. There was a red roaring to it now, like wildfire raging through a tinder dry forest. What could... Light! She stumbled and just caught her footing short of tumbling. If she had known this furnace, this fierce hunger was inside him, she would have been afraid to let him touch her. On the other hand, it might be nice knowing she had sparked such an inferno. She could not wait to see whether she produced the same effect as... She stumbled again, and this time had to catch herself on an ornately carved high chest. Oh, Light! Elaine! Her face felt like a furnace. This was like peeking through the bed curtains. Hurriedly, she tried the trick Elaine had told her about, imagining that ball of emotions tied up in a kerchief. Nothing happened. Frantically, she tried again, but the raging fire was still there. She had to stop looking at it, stop feeling it. Anything to get her attention anywhere but there. Anything. Maybe if she started talking. She should have drunk that heartleaf tea, she babbled. She never told what she saw except to those involved, and only then if they wanted to hear, but she had to say something. She'll get with child from this. 2 of them, a boy and a girl, both healthy and strong. She wants his babies, the Aiel woman mumbled. Her green eyes stared straight ahead. Her jaw was tight, and sweat beaded on her forehead. I will not drink the tea myself. Giving herself a shake, she frowned across the width of the hall at Min. My sister and the wise ones told me about you. You really see things about people that come true? Sometimes I see things, and if I know what they mean, they happen, Min said. Their voices, raised to reach each other, carried along the corridor. Red and white liveried servants turned to stare at them. Min moved to the center of the hallway. She would meet the other woman halfway, no more. After a moment, Avienda joined her. Min wondered whether to tell her what she had seen while they were all together. Avienda would have Rand's babies, too. 4 of them at once. Something was odd about that, though. The babies would be healthy, but still something odd. And people often did not like hearing about their futures, even when they said they wanted to. She wished someone could tell her whether she herself would. Walking along in silence, Avienda wiped sweat from her face with her fingers and swallowed hard. Min had to swallow, too. Everything Rand was feeling was in that ball. Everything. The kerchief trick didn't work for you either, she said hoarsely. Avienda blinked, and crimson darkened her face. A moment later, she said, That is better. Thank you. With him in my head, I forgot. She frowned. It did not work for you? Min shook her head miserably. This was indecent. It helps if I talk, though. She had to make friends with this woman somehow, if this whole peculiar business was to have a hope of working. I'm sorry for what I said. About toes, I mean. I know a little of your customs. There's something about that man that just makes me cheeky. I can't control my tongue. But don't think I'm going to let you start hitting me or carving on me. Maybe I have toe, but we'll have to find some other way. I could always groom your horse when we have time. You are as proud as my sister, Avienda muttered, frowning. What did she mean by that? You have a good sense of humor, too. She seemed to be talking to herself. You did not make a fool of yourself about Rand and Elaine the way most Wetlander women would. And you did remind me... With a sigh, she flipped her shawl up onto her shoulders. I know where there's some usquai. If you're too drunk to think, then... Staring down the hallway, she stopped dead. No, she growled. Not yet. Coming toward them was an apparition that made Min's jaw drop. Consternation pushed Rand beyond awareness. From comments, she had known that the Captain General of Elaine's guards was a woman, and Elaine's warder to boot, but nothing else. This woman had a thick, intricate golden braid pulled over one shoulder of her short, white-collared red coat, and her voluminous blue trousers were tucked into boots, with heels as high as Min's. Auras danced around her, and images flickered. More than Min had ever seen around anyone, thousands it seemed, cascading over one another. Elaine's warder and Captain General of the Queen's Guards wobbled a little, as though she had already been into the Usquai. Servants who caught sight of her decided they had work in another part of the palace, leaving the three of them alone in the corridor. She did not seem to see Min and Avienda until she almost walked into them. "You bloody helped her in this, didn't you?" she growled, focusing glassy-looking blue eyes on Avienda. "First she flaming vanishes out of my head, and then—" She trembled and visibly controlled herself, but even then she was breathing hard. Her legs did not seem to want to hold her upright. Licking her lips, she swallowed and went on angrily. "Burn her. I can't concentrate enough to shake it off. You let me tell you, if she's doing what I think she's doing, I'll kick her tickle hard around the bloody palace, and then I'll flaming welt her till she can't sit for a month, and you alongside her, if I have to find fork root to do it." "My first sister is a grown woman, Brigitte Trehilian," Avienda said truculently. Despite her tone, her shoulders were hunched, and she did not quite meet the other woman's stare. "You must stop trying to treat us as children. When she bloody well behaves like an adult, I bloody well treat her as one, but she has no right to do this. Not in my flaming head, she doesn't. Not in my—" Abruptly, Brigitte's glazed blue eyes bulged. The golden-haired woman's mouth dropped open, and she would have fallen if Min and Avienda had not each seized an arm. Squeezing her eyes shut, she sobbed just once, and whimpered, 2 months. Shaking free of them, she straightened and fixed Avienda with blue eyes clear as water and hard as ice. "Shield her for me, and I'll let you off your share." Avienda's sullen, indignant glare just slid off her. "You're Brigitte Silverbow," Min breathed. She had been sure even before Avienda said the name. No wonder the Aiel woman was behaving as if she feared those threats would be carried out right then and there. "Brigitte Silverbow. I saw you at Falma." Brigitte gave a start as if goosed, then looked around hurriedly. Once she realized they were alone, she relaxed. A little. She eyed Min up and down. "Whatever you saw, Silverbow is dead," she said bluntly. "I'm Brigitte Trehilian now, and that's all." Her lips twisted wryly for a moment. "The flaming lady, Brigitte Trehilian, if you flaming please. Kiss a sheep on Mother's Day if I can do anything about that, I suppose. And who might you be when you're at home? Do you always show off your legs like a bloody feather dancer?" "I am Min Farshaw," she replied curtly. This was Brigitte Silverbow, hero of 100 legends? The woman was foul-mouthed. And what did she mean Silverbow was dead? The woman was standing right in front of her. Besides, those multitudes of images and auras flashed by too quickly for her to make out any clearly, but she was certain they indicated more adventures than woman could have in one lifetime. Strangely, some were connected to an ugly man who was older than she, and others to an ugly man who was much younger, yet somehow Min knew they were the same man. Legend or no legend, that superior air irritated her no end. "Elaine, Avienda, and I just bonded a warder," she said without thinking. "And if Elaine is celebrating a little, well, you better think twice about storming in, or you'll be the one sitting tender." That was enough to make her aware of Rand again. That raging furnace was still there, hardly lessened at all, but thank the light he was no longer. Blood rushed into her cheeks. He had lain often enough in her arms, catching his breath in the tangle of their bedding, but this really did seem like peeping. "Him?" Brigitte said softly. "Mother's milk in a cup." She could have fallen in love with a cut purse or a horse thief, but she had to choose him, more fool her. By what I saw of him at that place you mentioned, the man's too pretty to be good for any woman. In any case, she has to stop. "You have no right," Avienda insisted in a sulky voice, and Brigitte took on a look of patience. Stretched patience, but still patience. "She might be proper as a Talmuri maiden, except when it comes to putting her head on the chopping block, but I think she'll wind up her courage to put him through his paces again, and even if she does whatever it was she did, she'll forget and be back in my head. I won't bloody go through that again." She squared herself, plainly ready to march off and confront Elaine. "Think of it as a good joke," Avienda said pleadingly. Pleadingly? "She has played a good joke on you, that is all." A curl of Brigitta's lip expressed what she thought of that. "There's a trick Elaine told me," Min said hurriedly, catching hold of Brigitta's sleeve. "It didn't work for me, but maybe—" Unfortunately, once she had explained— "She's still there," Brigitta said grimly after a moment. "Step out of my way, Min Farshaw," she said, pulling her arm free. "Or—" "Usquai!" Avienda's voice rose desperately, and she was actually wringing her hands. "I know where there is Usquai. If you're drunk— Please, Brigitta, I will pledge myself to obey you as apprentice to mistress, but please do not interrupt her. Do not shame her so." "Usquai," Brigitta mused, rubbing her jaw. "Is that anything like brandy? I think the girl is blushing. She really is prim most of the time, you know. A joke, you said?" Suddenly she grinned and spread her arms expansively. "Lead me to this Usquai of yours, Avienda. I don't know about you two, but I intend to get drunk enough to take off my clothes and dance on the table. And not a hair drunker." Min did not understand that at all, or why Avienda stared at Brigitta and suddenly began laughing about it being a wonderful joke, but she was sure she knew why Elaine was blushing, if she actually was. That hard ball of sensations in her head was a raging wildfire again. "Could we go find that Usquai now?" she said. "I want to get drunk as a drowned mouse, and fast." When Elaine woke the next morning, the bedchamber was icy, a light snow was falling on Camelin, and Rand was gone. Except inside her head. That would do. She smiled, a slow smile. For now it would. Stretching languorously beneath the blankets, she remembered her abandon the night before, and most of the day as well. She could hardly believe it had been her, and thought that she should be blushing like the sun. But she wanted to be abandoned with Rand, and she did not think she would ever blush again, not for anything connected to him. Best of all, he had left her a present. On the pillow beside her when she woke lay a golden lily in full bloom, the dew fresh on the lush petals. Where he could have gotten such a thing in the middle of winter she could not begin to imagine, but she wove a keeping around it and set it on a side table where she would see it every morning when she woke. The weave was Mugadin's teaching, but it would hold the blossom fresh forever, the dewdrops never evaporating, a constant reminder of the man who had given her his heart. Her morning was taken up with the news that Olivia had vanished during the night, a serious matter that put the kin in a tumult. It was not until Zaida appeared in a taking because Nynaeve had not come for a lesson with the Atha Mier that Elaine learned that Nynaeve and Lan were both gone from the palace too, and no one knew when or how. Not until much later did she learn that the collection of Angreal and Turangreal they had carried out of Ebudar was missing the most powerful of the 3 Angreal and several other items besides. Some of those, she was sure, were intended for a woman who expected to be attacked at any moment with the one power, which made the hastily scribbled note Nynaeve had left hidden among the remainder all the more disturbing. Chapter 13. Wonderful News. The Sun Palace's sunroom was cold, despite fires roaring on hearths at either end of the room, thickly layered carpets, and a slanted glass roof that let in bright morning light, where snow caught on the thin muntins did not shield it, but it was suitable for holding audiences. Cadsuane had thought it best not to appropriate the throne room. So far, Lord Dobraine had remained quiet about her holding Caroline Damodred and Darlin Cisnera. She saw no better way to keep them from going on with their mischief than keeping them in a firm grip. But Dobraine might begin to fuss over that if she pushed beyond what he considered proper. He was too close to the boy for her to want to force him, and faithful to his oaths. She could look back on her life and recall failures, some bitterly regretted, and mistakes that had cost lives, but she could not afford mistakes or failure here. Most definitely not failure. Light, she wanted to bite someone. "I demand the return of my wind finder, Aes Sedai," Harinadin Togara, all in green brocaded silk, sat rigidly in front of Cadsuane, her full mouth tight. Despite an unlined face, white streaked her straight black hair. Wave mistress of her clan for 10 years, she had commanded a large vessel long before that. Her sail mistress, Dara Din Selaan, a young woman all in blue, sat on a chair placed a careful foot farther back in accordance with their notions of propriety. The pair might have been dark carvings of outrage, and their outlandish jewelry somehow added to the effect. Neither so much as flickered an eye toward Eben when he bowed and offered silver
forgot I had
goblets
this
of
on a
hot
charger.
spiced wine on a tray. The boy did not seem to know what to do next when they took nothing. Frowning
much better.
uncertainly, he remained bent until Daigyan plucked at his red coat and led him away smiling, an amused pouter pigeon in dark blue slashed with white. A slender lad with a big nose and large ears, never to be called handsome, much less pretty, but she was very possessive of him. They took seats close together on a padded bench in front of one of the fireplaces and began playing cat's cradle. Your sister is assisting us in learning what happened on the unfortunate day, Cadsuane said smoothly and somewhat absently. Taking a swallow of her own spiced wine, she waited, uncaring whether they saw her impatient. No matter how Dobrain grumbled about how impossible it was to meet the terms of that incredible bargain Rafaela and Marana had made on behalf of the Althor boy, he still might have handled the sea folk himself. She could hardly give them half of her mind. Probably that was just as well for them. If she focused on the Athaan Mier, she would be hard-pressed not to swat them like bite-me's, though they were not the real source of her exasperation. 5 sisters were arrayed around the fireplace at the other end of the sunroom from Daigyan and Eben. Nasuna had a large wood-bound volume from the palace library spread on a reading stand in front of her chair. Like the others, she wore a plain woolen dress more suited to a merchant than an aristocrat. If any regretted the lack of silks or money for silks, they did not show it. Serene, with her thin beaded braids, stood working at a large embroidery frame, her needle making the tiny stitches of yet another flower in a field of blossoms. Ariane and Beldine were playing stones, watched by Elsa, who waited her turn to take on the winner. By all appearances, they were enjoying an idle morning, without a care in the world. Perhaps they knew they were here because she wanted to study them. Why had they sworn fealty to the Althor boy? At least Kiruna and the others had been in his presence when they decided to swear. She was willing to admit that no one could resist the influence of a Taviran when it caught you. But these 5 had taken a harsh penance for kidnapping him and reached their decision to offer oath before they were brought near him. In the beginning, she had been inclined to accept their various explanations, but over the last few days, that inclination had taken hard knocks. Disturbingly hard knocks. My Windfinder is not subject to your authority, Aes Sedai, Harina said sharply, as if denying the blood connection. Shallan must and will be returned to me at once. Dara nodded curt agreement. Cadsuane thought the sail mistress might do the same if Harina ordered her to jump from a cliff. In the Athaan Mier's hierarchy, Dara stood a long distance below Harina, and that was almost as much as Cadsuane knew of them. The sea folk might prove useful or might not, but she could find a way to get a grip on them in any case. This is an Aes Sedai inquiry, she replied blandly. We must follow Tower law. Loosely interpreted, to be sure. She had always believed the spirit of the law was far more important than the letter. Harina puffed up like an adder and began yet another harangue listing her rights and demands, but Cadsuane listened with half an ear. She could almost understand Ariane, a pale, black-haired Ilianer, fiercely insisting that she must be at the boy's side when he fought the last battle, and Beldine, so new to the shawl that she had not yet achieved agelessness, so determined to be everything that a green should be, and Elsa, a pleasant-faced Andoran whose eyes almost glowed when she spoke of making certain that he lived to face the Dark One, another green, and even more intense than most. Nasuna, hunched forward to peer at her book, looked like a black-eyed bird examining a worm. A brown, she would climb into a box with a scorpion if she wanted to study it. Serene might be fool enough to be startled that anyone thought her pretty, much less stunning, but the white insisted on the cool precision of her logic. Althor was the dragon reborn, and logically she must follow him. Tempestuous reasons, idiotic reasons, yet she could have accepted them, if not for the others. The door to the hall opened to admit Varen and Soralia. The leathery, white-haired Aiel woman handed something small to Varen that the brown tucked into her belt pouch. Varen was wearing a flowered brooch on her simple bronze-colored dress, the first jewelry Catswain had ever seen on her aside from her great serpent ring. "That will help you sleep," Soralia said. "But remember, just 3 drops in water or 1 in wine. A little more and you might sleep a day or longer. Much more and you will not wake. There is no taste to warn you, so you must be careful." So Varen was having trouble sleeping, too. Catswain had not had a good night's rest since the boy fled the Sun Palace. If she did not find one soon, she thought she might bite someone. Nasuna and the others were eyeing Soralia uneasily. The boy had made them apprentice themselves to the wise ones, and they had learned that the Aiel women took that very seriously. One snap of Soralia's bony fingers could end their idle mourning. Harina leaned forward out of her chair and gave Catswain's cheek a sharp tap with her fingers. "You are not listening to me," she said harshly. Her face was a thunderhead, and that of her sail mistress scarcely less stormy. "You will listen." Catswain put her hands together and regarded the woman over her fingertips. No, she would not stand the wave mistress on her head here and now. She would not send the woman back to her apartments weeping. She would be as diplomatic as Corwin could wish. Hastily she scanned through what she had heard. "You speak for the mistress of the ships to the Athaan Mier, with all of her authority, which is more than I can imagine," she said mildly. "If your wind finder is not returned to you within the hour, you will see that the Coromor punishes me severely. You require an apology for your wind finder's imprisonment, and you require me to make Lord Dobrain set aside the land promised by the Coromor immediately. I believe that covers the essential points, except for the one about having her flogged." "Good," Harina said, leaning back comfortably, in command now. Her smile was sickeningly self-satisfied. "You will learn that I do not care a fig for your Coromor," Catswain continued, her voice still mild. "All the figs in the world were for the dragon reborn, but not one for the Coromor." She did not alter her tone by a hair. "If you ever touch me again without permission, I will have you stripped, striped, bound, and carried back to your rooms in a sack." Well, diplomacy had never been her strongest point. "If you do not cease pestering me about your sister, well, I might actually grow angry." Standing, she ignored the sea folk woman's indignant puffing and gaping, and raised her voice to be heard at the end of the room. "Serene!" The slender Tarabona whirled from her embroidery, beaded braids clicking, and hurried to Catswain's side, barely hesitating before spreading her dark gray skirts in a curtsy. The wise one.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this live tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone can continue to stop by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.